Do you live in a bad neighborhood? What's the worst thing that happened? Live in LA. Gunshots, police helicopters with the searchlights on in the area a couple nights a week, usually a lot of cops knocking on doors. Hoods hang on the sidewalk and drink and smoke all day. There's a very clearly marked trap house, or gang HQ, just down the street with the proper gang graffiti up and down the street sidewalks and walls. I get off work late and often come home to people siphoning gas out from cars on the street, but I'm a skinny white kid and have off-street parking, so I kind of just turn a blind eye and hope they don't say shit cause they know where I live. No street lights on the side streets. I don't walk M after dark. Seems like you got a lot going on around there. It's a rough environment for sure. Seeing all that activity must be unsettling, especially with the noise and the crowd. It's smart to keep your distance and stick to safer areas. Being cautious is probably the best move in that situation. Gotta look out for yourself. Just hope things stay quiet for you when you get off work. Used to be a family of drug dealers living in about 3 or 4 different houses in my street. They were scary as hell, but generally didn't bother anyone apart from loud music and people coming and going at odd hours. One day, some junkie kid was spotted trying to climb through an open front window of one of the non-dealer family neighbors. Ma spotted him, screamed for her boys. They came lumbering out and dragged the unfortunate perpetrator backwards out of the window and took him into one of the houses. Not sure what happened, but I didn't see a police car come to pick him up. And if I'd been asked, fair to say I'd have seen nothing. Uneasy face. That sounds like a pretty intense situation. It's wild how some people can live right next to that kind of stuff and just keep to themselves. The whole see no evil, hear no evil vibe is real in neighborhoods like that. Can't say I want to be involved if it came down to it. Sometimes it's better to just let things unfold without getting mixed up in it. I never lived in a bad neighborhood, luckily, but I had a best friend who had an apartment in the worst part of town, and I often spent the night there. First off, we were terrified that the people would be rude towards us because we weren't like them, but majority were surprisingly friendly. However, hearing occasional very loud gunshots at random times in the night was common. You could also hear neighbors / people fighting outside very loudly on a daily basis. And you have easy access to a lot of different kinds of drugs, and a lot goes on in the dark. Worst thing? 3 people were killed in the apartment right next to my best friend's ex. That sounds intense. It's pretty wild that you felt safe despite the chaos around. I mean, gunshots and fights every night would get to anyone. But it's interesting that people were friendly. Just goes to show you can find community in unexpected places. Still, having 3 killings next door is heavy. I guess it makes you think about where you choose to spend your time. I live in Skyline Hills in San Diego. It is considered by many people who are familiar with San Diego to be a really seedy part of town. It's really not that bad, but we get the occasional shooting and police chases with helicopters and whatnot. Although most of the times the helicopters are out, it's just the police trying to flex and scare people. It's pretty annoying. I guess the craziest thing to happen was an ice cream truck being robbed at gunpoint up the street. Edit. About a year ago, a house few houses down got full-on raided for what, but there was a wild gang of undercover cops and eventually a SWAT team or something similar. They took all of their cars and a few guys were hauled away. Sounds like a wild place to live. It's interesting how some areas get a bad rap. The helicopter presence seems overkill, but I guess it's part of the routine. The ice cream truck robbery is pretty bizarre. You don't hear stories like that every day. And a SWAT raid nearby adds a different level of intensity. Living there must keep you on your toes. Not me, but my dad. He lived in some townhomes in Arizona. Apparently his neighbors had a break-in at 3 in the morning. A gang armed with assault rifles came in and started berating the family. There was a mom, dad, and a couple kids. They roughed the dad up a bit, took his ID and a couple bucks from his wallet and left. My dad used to be a cop, and he thinks that the gang members got the wrong apartment, and they were looking for someone specific. The family ended up staying at a hotel for a couple of days, came back, got their stuff, and moved out of state. I don't blame them. Pretty SP00KY that happened right next door to my dad, though. That sounds pretty intense. It's surprising how something like that can happen so close to home. I can see why the family moved out. Situations like that are really unsettling. Your dad's background as a cop might give him a different perspective on it all. It's a reminder of how quickly things can turn in the neighborhood. Hopefully, they found a safer place to live. It's not really a bad area, but I wouldn't be caught dead walking alone after dark. There once was a guy that used to live a couple houses down from my family, and we would always smell weed coming from his place. He was quite a big drug dealer, and one day a black Escalade just pulled up to his house and started shooting it up. Me and my brother were in our backyard goofing around on our scooters when we heard what sounded like fireworks go off. We hit the ground and then saw the car speed away like nothing happened. My brother started crying, so I took him and ran back inside before anything else could have happened. I was 13, I think. My brother was 9. Never did see the Escalade come back after that, and we also never saw the guy again either. Pretty sure he died, but I still don't know. Everyone else just went back to their daily lives, including me and my family. Whenever you've lived around that kind of stuff, it usually doesn't bother you anymore. It's an intense situation for sure. Hearing something like that while just having fun can be really shocking. It's interesting how fast people move on from violence in their neighborhoods. That whole environment can shape how you view things. It's normal to feel scared in those moments, but it seems like you handled it well by getting your brother to safety. Life just keeps going even when crazy stuff happens. I live in a city in Canada with a pretty high murder rate. Most of it's fine. It's just a high concentration in a couple of neighborhoods. One of my buddies used to live in a sketchy neighborhood, and a couple of days after he moved, somebody got stabbed in front of his old house. I live in a great neighborhood, but for a while there was a group home right across the street from us that was managed horribly. Basically everybody there was fresh out of prison/juvie and got to do whatever they wanted because the staff didn't care. They stashed a ton of drugs in their neighbors' garages. They vandalized and stole all the time. No BNES, but a lot of broken car windows and missing bikes. BFS and GFS came by at all hours blaring music from their cars. One guy a few houses down almost got beat to death because he mouthed off at one of the kids. A friend across the lane had his bike stolen from him while he was riding it in broad daylight. It took us a few years to get rid of them because the company running it was well funded, but after literally every single person on the block filed a separate FIPA request, CBC noticed and the situation finally got some attention. This sounds pretty rough. It's unsettling when a neighborhood can shift like that, especially with a group home causing so much trouble. Glad to hear you got rid of them eventually. Filing those requests seems like a lot of work, but it's good it finally made a difference. A high murder rate combined with that kind of chaos makes for a tense living situation. I can see why you feel the way you do. I live near a very dangerous refugee camp. It is said that most of the most wanted people in my country hide there. Clashes frequently happen, most recently this week. Medium to heavy weaponry is frequently used. In fact, weapons are so common, even among children. The army is kind of surrounding the camp, so usually people don't get in and out very easily. Day-to-day life is not so bad. You just get used to the fact that you need to go hide as soon as bullets start. It might be a birthday, a funeral, a wedding, or whatever. Just go hide. My school was within few hundred meters of the camp. I remember being taken down to a basement to hide and being asked not to touch anything we find on the ground after. One bullet also once reached my house, ricocheted to the floor, and broke a glass door. We were standing there minutes before that happened. That sounds really intense. Living that close to a dangerous place changes a lot about daily life. Hiding from bullets during events sounds stressful. It's wild how you have to adapt to such a situation, like avoiding things on the ground for safety. The story about the bullet hitting your house is pretty close call. It must have left a mark on you, just realizing how fragile everything can be. Live here almost 9 years. Had stolen 1 iBook laptop, 4 iPods, 1 lawnmower, 1 camera, 1 bicycle. Once woke up at 4 a.m. to a strung-out teen wearing a pink Hello Kitty backpack he stole from my daughter and 3 pairs of sunglasses parked on top of his head, about 18 inches from me, rooting around under the bed looking for stuff to steal. In my sleep haze, I asked him, "Are you drunk?" And he answered in the affirmative, then started walking toward the living room. I followed him, and he ran out the front door, amazingly fast for someone that messed up. I called the cops immediately, but they never caught him. Also have a neighbor about a block away who regularly gets drunk and high on painkillers, then goes around picking fights with neighbors. The police are very familiar with him. Deadbolts, people use them. That's a lot to deal with over the years. Having your things stolen is tough, especially with the random encounters like that. It's good you called the cops, but I guess there's not much they can do if they don't catch anyone. The neighbor sounds like a real nuisance too. Definitely seems like those deadbolts are worth it for some peace of mind. I used to. When we lived with my mother, it was in a duplex on a street with drug dealers in every other house. My neighbor, in the house attached to mine, dealt heroin. One morning at 5 a.m., my house was shot at because the shooter mistook it for the neighbor's. One went through my little brother's window. He wasn't hurt, and I don't even think anything got damaged, but it's scary as fuck to wake up to when your mom isn't even home. My neighborhood now is very nice and full of sweet old people, and I like it that way. That sounds really intense. Growing up in that environment must have been rough. It's good to hear you're in a better place now, having a safe neighborhood with nice people. That contrast likely feels like a big change. Those experiences shape how you see things. It's a relief your brother was okay after that incident. I live in New Haven, Connecticut. I used to live in a fairly bad but not completely awful part near SCSU. A guy got shot at the corner store. He lived, but frankly, he deserved it. He was screaming at some random drug dealer and hit him with a book a few times while yelling, "This is my Bible." It was not a Bible. A few years later, I lived on a main street that's fairly shitty, but not insane. The worst thing that happened was a couple of hookers arguing in my backyard. The dogs scared them off, though. Now, I live in a nice, quiet place. It's much better. Sounds like you've had quite the experience living in different neighborhoods. It's interesting how those moments shape your view of a place. Moving from a rough area to a quieter one must feel pretty good. People seem to adapt to their surroundings in some unique ways. Glad to hear you're in a better spot now. Our town isn't the worst, but we have had our bike nicked from our back garden that isn't even visible from the road, and they had to scale a fence to get over it. Not the worst thing to happen, but it's just annoying. Also, we have a bus stop directly in front of our flat, and there are always druggies hanging around at it waiting for drug deals. There were some sexual assaults that happened this time last year down the road. A women's staffy that wasn't on a lead and didn't like other dogs came after mine, and when she eventually came to retrieve it, and we continued to walk off, she shouted after me that it was friendly and I didn't need to stick my nose up at her. Luckily, my dog is too stupid and thinks every dog just wants to roughhouse, but I know by watching the behaviors that it was not a friendly dog. I know firsthand that it could be much worse. I know there are places in the US that are definitely rougher. We just get bothered by a lot by the druggies and chavs that are looking for fights, along with the occasional break-in and stolen property. That sounds pretty frustrating. Losing a bike is annoying, especially when it feels like it happened in your own space. The drug issues at the bus stop add to it too. It's good you're aware that it could be worse, but dealing with that environment sounds stressful. It's tough to enjoy your area when there are people looking for trouble. Hopefully, it improves for you. I lived in the ghetto apartments in college. Loved it. During State Patty's Day my junior year, the whole street was absolutely trashed. Had drug dealers running a growing operation in the apartment next to ours. We got to watch the DEA bust down the door. I was approached in the hallway asking if I knew where the guy could buy weed since my other neighbors were out of town. We had random people walk into our apartment on multiple occasions because they were very, very, very high. They just didn't know that it wasn't their apartment. They were usually cool dudes. There was an old schizophrenic lady across the hall one year. She tried to catnap the feral cats that randomly roamed the halls. She also didn't shower. Sounds like quite the experience. Living in a chaotic setting like that can be interesting. The DEA bust must have been intense to witness. Random encounters with lost, high people seem wild, but also kind of funny. That old lady with the cats adds an odd touch to the whole scene. Definitely a unique college life, filled with unexpected moments. Just moved out of one. The absolute worst thing that happened was a triple murder around the corner from me, but it was a very specific scenario. Crazy guy off his meds killed his parents and sister. Not like it was a random drive-by that could have impacted a total stranger. The worst thing that happened on a regular basis were random car vandalisms, though. Happened a couple times where I'd walk out from my house to discover that some assholes just walked down the whole block in the middle of the night, keying every car on the street. That's a rough experience. A triple murder nearby is definitely alarming, especially with those details. It's good you highlight it wasn't random. The car vandalism sounds frustrating too, having to deal with that kind of mindless destruction. Just when you think you can relax, something like that happens. Moving out seems like a wise choice after all that.